The Battle of Uhud. So before getting to Uhud, it's just best to run through a few small-scale conflicts that occurred in the time period between Badr and Uhud. Obviously I spoke about the Banu Qaynuqa last time, as the Jews of Medina warranted their own introductory episode, but I'll rush through these next couple of conflicts. So the first one is the invasion of Sawiq. Abu Sufyan, still presumably raging from the disaster of Badr, gathered 200 men and tried to create an alliance with the Jewish tribe of Banu Nadir to attack the Muslims in Medina and cause a civil war within the city. 2 Muslim civilians were killed, but the Quraysh fled when the Muslims were roused, leaving behind a large amount of flour, sawiq, which the Quraysh left behind to help them escape more quickly. Next was the raid on Ghatafan and the invasion of Buhran, where overly ambitious tribes were planning to move against Medina, but a mere show of force by the Muslims was enough to send these tribes scurrying. There was no casualties in these conflicts. Next up, it wasn't really a conflict but an assassination. The assassination of Ka'b ibn Ashraf. Ka'b was a leader within the Banu Nadir tribe who seemingly had a close relationship with Quraysh, a relationship most likely based on trade. After the Battle of Badr, Ka'b went on a tirade of writing emotional, praising poetry of the deceased leaders of Quraysh. The aim of this poetry was to incite the Quraish of Makkah to rise up again against the Muslims of Medina, with Ka'b even secretly planning an alliance with the Meccans. Once all this information was discovered by the Muslims, it had become greatly apparent that Ka'b was an extremely dangerous individual who had not only broken the constitution of Medina, but was also actively involved in treason against the state, and thus his assassination was authorized by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and carried out by Banu Aus member Muhammad ibn Maslama and some other Ansar. Now on to the Battle of Uhud. So as we know, the leadership of Quraysh had gone through a major shake-up due to Badr. The next generation had stepped up, and now we had Abu Sufyan as the de facto leader, with others such as Amr ibn al-As, Sufyan ibn Umayyah, Khalid ibn Walid, and Ikramah ibn Abu Jahl also climbing up the ladder. Their reputation had taken a hit as the most prestigious tribe and the best city in all of Hijaz. Not only this, but they still had to be wary of travelling into Syria for trade, as going past Medina was the only option. Also within the city there were many people screaming for vengeance against the Muslim Muhajirun in Medina, most specifically Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. So Abu Sufyan and the other leaders were left with no option other than to plan a large-scale battle against the Muslims. As mentioned earlier, they had tried a few smaller-scale skirmishes and attempting to spread discontentment within Medina, but nothing had come to fruition, and so Quraysh planned a large battle. Managing to amass a much larger, more organised force than Badr, Abu Sufyan set out with a force numbering 3,000 strong, with as many camels and 200 cavalry. These numbers were extremely rare in Arabia at the time, and it truly goes to show us the intent behind the Meccans. The Muslims got wind of this force, most likely via Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, who was working undercover for the Muslims within Mecca. The Medinans managed to gather a force of 1,000. With this being more of a defensive battle, it was very much easier to gather participants than Badr. As usual, a council of war took place for the leadership of Medina to decide how to approach the battle. Abdullah ibn Ubay and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam were surprisingly on the same page and wanted to remain in Medina and deal with the Meccans in a siege sense, whereas many young, eager Medinans were strongly pushing to meet the Meccans out in the open, away from the city, no doubt spurred on and imagining another easy win like Badr. Eventually, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam relented and decided to meet the Quraysh outside of Medina. He went to make his preparations and put his armour on. Then he and a group of around 1,000 Muslim men set out northward from Medina towards Mount Uhud late on Friday. Early the next morning, they took a position on the lower slopes of the hill of Uhud. This was an intelligent decision. It meant that they couldn't be attacked from behind or from the right. Large numbers couldn't press upon them all at once. Another strategic play by the Prophet was to station 50 archers on a small hill, which was acting as a dangerous deterrent against the cavalry of Quraish, and also protected their left flank. These 50 archers were told by the Prophet, "If you see us prevail and start to take spoils, do not come to assist us, and if you see us get vanquished and birds eat from our heads, do not come to assist us." Unfortunately, shortly before the battle commenced, Abdullah ibn Ubay and 300 men of the army withdrew their support for the Prophet, heading back to Medina, leaving the Muslims with only 700 men to take on a force more than 4 times the size of theirs. The Meccan army positioned themselves facing the Muslim lines, with the main body led by Abu Sufyan, and the left and right flanks commanded by Ikramah ibn Abu Jahl and Khalid ibn Walid. Amr ibn al-As was overall commander of the cavalry to help coordinate the attacks of both flanks. The battle began, like Badr, with some duels. The Meccan standard-bearer, Talha ibn Abi Talha, advanced and challenged the enemy to a duel. Ali ibn Abu Talib rushed forth and struck Talha down in a single blow. Talha's brother Uthman ran forwards to pick up the fallen banner. This time Hamza emerged from the Muslim ranks, bringing Uthman to a similar fate as Talha. It was their family that was responsible for the Meccan army's standard-bearing, and thus one by one, Talha's brothers and sons went to retrieve the Meccan banner and fought unsuccessfully until they all eventually perished. Following the duels, general engagement between the two armies commenced. Meccan confidence quickly began to dissolve as the Muslims swept through their ranks, with Hamza and Abu Dujana, who had famously been given a sword to use by the Prophet himself, seemingly carved through the Meccans like a hot knife through butter. Too busy wreaking havoc amongst the Meccans, Hamza was unaware that he was being tracked. As he ran from right to left, throwing down his enemies, an Ethiopian slave of Jubair ibn Mut'im called Wahshi, who had been offered his freedom if he killed Hamza, crouched, waiting for the opportune moment to throw his javelin. Wahshi was an expert javelin thrower, and he waited patiently, keeping himself hidden behind shrubbery. When the opportune moment arrived, he launched his javelin from behind Hamza. It found its mark, piercing deep, coming all the way through Hamza's body and out through his stomach. Even a warrior as tough as Hamza couldn't tank a shot so precise and unexpected. And so he fell, dead. The Muslims were still in the ascendancy at this point, and the Meccan army was pushed back, and repeated attempts by its cavalry to overrun the left Muslim flank were negated by the Muslim archers. Enjoying the best of these early encounters, the Muslims pierced through the Meccan lines, with victory appearing certain. However, once the archers started seeing the Meccans retreating, they believed the battle was over, a foregone conclusion, and so they started to dispute among themselves about whether or not to join in, so as to not miss the collection of the war booty. This then led to most of the archers, probably around 40 of them, to run downhill to join in the advance, leaving the flank vulnerable. At this critical moment, the Meccan cavalry, led by the infamous Khalid ibn Walid, exploited this move and attacked the remaining minority of Muslim archers who refused to disobey the Prophet's orders and were still positioned on the hill. The cavalry easily overpowered the small number of archers, and from there they were then able to target and overrun the Muslims' flank and rear. Confusion ensued, and numerous Muslims were killed. While the Meccan riposte strengthened, rumours circulated that the Prophet too had perished. However, this could have been a case of mistaken identity, as Musab ibn Umair, who had a similar resemblance to the Prophet, had fallen to the enemy's onslaught. With that news circulating and the Muslim command being split from the bulk of the army, the confusion turned into absolute pandemonium, with the Muslims running this way and that, hiding, cowering, distraught at the prospect of the Prophet being dead. Certain figures like Anas ibn Nadr, the uncle of Anas ibn Malik, managed to remain level-headed and acted as rallying cries to the stunned Muslims, reminding them that if the Prophet is truly dead, then why should we continue to live? After some time, many of them came back to their senses, and that's when they realised that commotion was building at a certain part of the battlefield. At the slopes of Uhud, where the Prophet ﷺ's camp had been. He became the object of attack from various members of the army of Quraysh. At this point, he only had a few men around him, such as Ali and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, although soon after, around 10 more managed to form a small band around him, such as Abu Bakr, Talha, Abu Ubaidah, Abdurrahman, and Abu Dujana. During this fracas, a few Meccans had managed to injure the Prophet ﷺ. He'd had a few of his teeth shattered by rocks hurled. He'd been struck so hard in the cheek by one weapon that his chainmail in his helmet had become embedded deep into his cheeks, and he had also been dealt a wound to the forehead. After fierce hand-to-hand combat, most of the Muslims managed to withdraw and regroup higher up on the slopes of Uhud. The Meccan cavalry was unable to climb the slopes of Uhud in pursuit of the Muslims, and with the Muslims having the higher ground, the fighting slowed. The clash finally ended with the last kill done by the Prophet himself by hurling a javelin at his Meccan enemy Ubay ibn Khalaf. This is where some heartbreaking acts took place, as the bodies of the dead Muslims were mutilated, so much so that when it came time for the burial of the bodies, they were nearly unrecognisable. When Abu Sufyan wanted to leave, he went to the top of the mountain and shouted loudly, saying, "Victory in war goes by turns. Today is in exchange for the day of Badr." Umar al-Khattab, unable to contain himself, answered him and said, "Allah is most high and most glorious. We are not equal. Our dead are in paradise, yours are in hell." At this answer, Abu Sufyan said to Umar, "Have we killed Muhammad?" Umar replied, "By Allah, you have not. He is listening to what you are saying right now." Abu Sufyan then decided to return to Mecca without pressing his advantage of re-attacking the wounded Muslims of Medina. But on his way back to Mecca, he would speak to tribes close to Medina, attempting to persuade them to make alliances with the Meccans, whilst there was also still some talk within his army, who were trying to convince everyone to go and finish the Muslims off once and for all, whilst they were at their weakest. But this was by no means the end of the battle. Once the dead Muslims had been buried, the Prophet ﷺ and his army returned to Medina to freshen up and get their wounds checked, and put plans in motion to ensure the Meccans were making their way home. Although this next section has its own name as the Battle of Hamra al-Assad, I believe it is more like the final part of the Battle of Uhud. The prophets feared that as the Quraysh had actually failed to avail anything for their victory, that they may turn back and attack Medina, and having almost 3,000 enemies roaming about close by, could not be left unchecked. So he sent 3 spies to track the departing Meccan army. 2 of them met the Meccan army at Hamra al-Assad, about 8 miles from Medina, but were spotted, caught, and killed by the Meccans. The next morning on a Sunday, the day after the Battle of Uhud, when the Muslims woke up, they heard that the Prophet had called on them to join him in the pursuit of the returning Quraysh army. He gave a general order of mobilization with the condition that only those who had participated in the Uhud battle were eligible to participate in the new operation. The Muslim fighters, under the leadership of the Prophet, went to Hamra al-Assad and found the 2 dead bodies of the spies. Once the Prophet learned that the Quraysh were not there to attack him further, he decided to spend a few more nights in the area before returning to Medina. Whilst at Hamra al-Assad, the Prophet ﷺ made an agreement with a man called Mabad al-Khuzā, who was then sent to Mecca to spread false information. In Mecca, Mabad met with Abu Sufyan and told him that the Prophet had managed to gather a large force to fight the Quraysh. Abu Sufyan and his companions up until this point were planning a massive and decisive attack on Medina to finish off the Muslims once and for all. But hearing Mabad's talk of the great military strength that the Prophet had collected, Abu Sufyan decided against his plan of an immediate attack on the Muslims. In the Battle of Uhud, the Meccans lost 20-odd fighters, and the Muslims around 70, a few of which I'll name now. Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, Anas ibn Nadr, who was the uncle of Anas ibn Malik, Abu Hudayfa al-Yaman, who is the father of Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, Abdullah bin Jahsh, the brother of Zainab, who is the wife of the Prophet, Abdullah ibn Amr, who is the father of Jabir ibn Abdullah, Malik ibn Sinan, who is the father of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, and Musab ibn Umair. Whilst the Muslims did not win this battle, not only having lost more fighters and important figures, the Meccans had failed to achieve their aim of destroying the Prophet and his followers. They had not reopened up the trade routes to Syria, and the Meccans were also the ones who withdrew from the battlefield and headed back home first, with the Muslims ending the week as the aggressors. Next time, we will be discussing a couple of missionary trips gone wrong and the invasion of Banu Nadir. As-salama.